They called me selfish. They said I abandoned my own family, turned my back when they needed me most. Except, the night I nearly died in a car crash, broken ribs and blood in my mouth, not one of them noticed I was missing. No calls, no visits, just a flood of spa selfies in the family group chat. That was the night I realized I wasn't their daughter, I was their bank. Like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Let's get into it. I used to think being the oldest was a role you grew out of. Turns out it's a job description. On paper, I'm a project manager in a mid-sized firm downtown, deadlines, deliverables, corralling meetings that want to run off cliffs. Off paper, I am a human duct tape roll with a pulse. Carly's rent covered twice this year alone. Mom's electric bill when the heat warning hit in July paid before it could flip to past due. Dad's brake pads and a serpentine belt that squealed like a kettle Merry Christmas. My calendar has color codes for clients and another set for family fires. Work calls me reliable. Family calls me M. Nobody uses the word tired. It sneaks up on you, that kind of tired. It's polite about it, arrives with a smile and a list. It tells you this is what good daughters do, what big sisters do, what families in commercials do. You hold the ladder while everyone climbs. You never look down. That Friday I stayed late finishing a status deck that no one would read closely. The office emptied around me, a spray of good nights, the elevator's distant chime, the hum of the AC turning the place into a glass aquarium. My phone buzzed twice. Carly, love, ooh, can you float me till Friday? Promise it's the last time. Mom, a photo of a candle with a caption about self-care. I thumbed a reply to Carly, "We'll talk," and didn't send it. I closed my laptop, stacked my sticky notes in one neat square, and told myself that not answering was also a kind of answer. Outside, the parking lot smelled like rain that never arrived. My car blinked hello. I sat behind the wheel and let the day settle. Dinner became a small negotiation with myself: rotisserie chicken from Martinez's bodega, or drive-through tacos from the place that's always out of napkins. Chicken meant a fork plate, actual chewing. Tacos meant one-handed, paper-wrapped easy. I rubbed the heel of my hand against a tension knot at my neck and chose tacos. Convenience winning by a nose. Driving at night in this city feels like slipping backstage. Storefronts, dim buses wheeze toward depots, and the sidewalks thin to dog walkers and insomniacs. I rolled past rows of shadowed porches and the neon of a laundromat still open. Fluff and fold people bent over carts like monks in prayer. My mind did its usual two-track thing, half on work. Did I flag that risk about the vendor, half on family? Carly had said, "Promise it's the last time last time." Mom would say she hated asking, then ask. Dad would say things were tight, then call it a favor. It wasn't the money that stung so much as the certainty of being needed only in one direction. I loved them. I do. Love just feels heavier when it's invoiced. The light ahead shifted from green to yellow. I eased my foot, neither speeding up nor slamming down, choosing patience like it made me morally superior. The radio was low, some late-night host chuckling about a celebrity divorce. The smell inside the car was spilled coffee and the faint lemon of those hanging trees. I caught my reflection for a second in the black window, a tired woman with a ponytail that had lost the battle hours ago. Emily Grace Whitaker, I said aloud, as if saying my whole name could center me. It didn't, but it made me smile. The intersection's red arrived like a period. I stopped. No music, no buzzing phone. The kind of quiet that feels earned. I glanced left, empty street storefront glass, hand-painted with open, flipped to closed. I glanced right, two headlights smaller than dice far away. I thought of the tacos again. I thought about how if I got them, I'd have to eat over the sink because the kitchen table was still colonized by bills I hadn't sorted. I thought about calling someone just to hear my name in a voice that wasn't asking for anything. I thought about nothing much at all. The impact came sideways, fast and wrong. The world went from quiet to metal, shrieking in a single breath. My door punched in as if a giant fist had decided I was an envelope to be crumpled. Glass bloomed. The seatbelt locked and bit. Something heavy and white exploded airbag slamming my chest and face. I tried to inhale and got talc-hot plastic the metallic bite of my own blood. Time didn't slow. It jumped. One frame red light. Next frame I was upside down, hanging the car, a broken animal groaning around me. Sound is weird in moments like that. Everything is muffled and loud at once. A high, whining feedback. A drip somewhere. The clicking metronome of the turn signal that hadn't mattered 2 seconds ago. My hair hung toward the roof. A spiderweb of windshield glinted with streetlight. The smell found me gasoline braided with hot rubber and something electrical burning. Panic tried to crawl up my throat. I swallowed it down with the blood. Hey, can you hear me? A voice outside, close thin with adrenaline. I nodded before I remembered I should not be moving. Pain shot from my shoulder like a live wire. I tasted the word yes and spat copper instead. A hand tugged at the door handle. It didn't open. Another voice lower telling the first to wait, not to yank it. I blinked hard, and edges sharpened the inverted world of the ceiling light. The rosary someone had given me looped around the rear view, now dangling like a pendulum counting down. Something I didn't want to know. "Ma'am, don't move," a new voice said. "Authority calm. We're calling it in. Stay with me." I stayed because there was nowhere else to go. Tears slid into my hairline. I wanted my mother. I wanted my own bed. I wanted a redo of 1,000 small choices that had led to a red light at a bad time in a city that had never loved me back. The first responders arrived in a rush of red and blue. Sirens carved the night open and left it bleeding. A bright beam lanced through the cracked glass. Hands found me steady and sure. Someone cut the belt and gravity returned me to myself with a thud that splashed pain across my ribs. I made a sound I'd never made before, an animal noise. A blanket found my shoulders scratchy and warm. Words washed over me in fragments, dislocated, stable, lucky, deep breaths. They slid me onto a board, my body suddenly an object designed to be moved by committee. Asphalt became ambulance floor, roof became ceiling. The world narrowed to the inside of a metal room that smelled like antiseptic and wet coats. A paramedic with kind eyes held my gaze like a rope. "What's your name, Emily?" I said. My mouth didn't like the shape of it. "Emily Grace Whitaker." "Emily, you were in a collision. You're okay. We're taking you to county. Can you tell me the date?" I told him. I told him my address and my company and my sister's name without meaning to. He wrote it down, printing neatly on a clipboard that bounced with every bump. The siren's wail pressed on my chest from the outside. Inside, my heart kept time of its own, fast, disobedient. Someone wrapped something around my arm, squeezed, released. I tried to think of tacos again, and instead thought of Carly's last emergency, how I'd driven across town before dawn with a cashier's check because her landlord had a policy. I thought about Dad's tight month and Mom's one little favor. The resentment was a thin wire humming under everything, even there, even then, and that made me feel small. The ER was all light, pools of it, sheets of it, daggers of it. Doors opened and swallowed me, spit me into a corridor where everything moved without stopping. A nurse spoke into the air, and the air answered. They rolled me past a line of faces in chairs, bored, bleeding, resigned. The air smelled like bleach and pennies and stale coffee. They cut my blouse with clean scissors that made a soft, greedy sound and apologized while doing it. The doctor pressed on my ribs and stars burst under my skin. The shoulder had its own weather system pulsing with lightning. Dislocation, possible fractures, someone said. Concussion, mild. Mild felt like calling a hurricane breezy. They fitted an oxygen cannula under my nose. Cold air tasted like tin. They taped a line to my hand, a butterfly needle sliding under the skin with a sting that felt far away. Names floated around me with job titles attached like ID badges. I learned to pick out the ones meant for me. You're going to feel sleepy, Emily. We're going to get an X-ray, okay? You're doing great. I'd been doing great my whole life. It had never felt like this. As they wheeled me toward imaging, I tilted my head enough to see the rectangle of night through a narrow window. The city glittered indifferent. The floor hummed beneath the bed, a machine purr. I tried to picture who I'd call. My phone was somewhere. My contacts list was full of people who knew where to find me when they needed help. Would anyone know where to find me now? The drugs softened the edges of the thought until it became a cloud I could float on. We turned. Bright lights. A door with a hand-painted mural of fish swimming toward a horizon. A nurse tucked the blanket up to my chin like I was a kid who'd fallen asleep on the couch. "Rest," she said. Will someone call my family?" I asked. My voice sounded small, like it came from down a hallway. "If you want us to," she said. "Do you want us to?" I thought of Carly's candle emojis and Mom's selfies and Dad's thumbs-up texts that stood in for conversation. I thought of how easy it had always been for them to find me when they needed saving. The bed rolled forward. The ceiling lights blurred into one long, glowing road. "Yes," I said. Then, because a part of me wanted to know the answer more than I wanted the help, I changed it. "No. Not yet." They pushed me under a bright square of light, the machine a white mouth opening to swallow me whole. As the cold table kissed my back and the world narrowed to the sound of my own breath, I wondered who would be standing beside me when I opened my eyes. And if no one was, what that would tell me about everything I'd been building. When I opened my eyes, the light in the hospital room was thin and gray, the kind that made you wonder if it was morning or if you were dreaming about morning. My body felt foreign, like I was renting it from someone careless. Pain announced itself in every direction. My ribs screamed when I tried to shift, my shoulder throbbed with a sharp, deep pulse, and my skull carried a dull drumbeat that wouldn't stop. A nurse noticed me blinking and leaned over, adjusting the line taped to my hand. "You're awake," she said gently. "You've got a dislocated shoulder, 2 broken ribs, and a mild concussion. You're lucky." Lucky. The word clung to me like static. I couldn't sit up, couldn't scratch the itch crawling down my arm, couldn't laugh without feeling like my chest would splinter apart. If this was luck, I didn't want to meet its opposite. They said I'd been unconscious for a stretch, then drifting in and out. The details blurred: machines, humming shoes, squeaking voices using my name as if it belonged to someone else. I didn't ask for my family right away. Somewhere in the haze, I expected them to be there automatically. That's what people do when a loved one flips their car on a Friday night, right? They rush in. They sit at the bedside. They hold your hand, even if you don't wake up. Word travels fast in families. Or at least I thought it did. By the second day, the IV bruised the back of my hand, the food tasted like cardboard, and I realized the only people who had spoken my name were paid to do so. I glanced at my phone sitting untouched on the tray table, the screen black and silent. It should have been buzzing off the hook. I had pictured missed calls, worried texts, at least one all-caps message from my mother. When I finally found the courage to check, there were 27 unread notifications. For a heartbeat, relief surged. Maybe they knew. Maybe they cared. The first image hit me like another crash. Carly wrapped in a white robe, holding up a champagne glass in one hand, flashing a peace sign with the other. The caption read, "Spa time baby." The next photo was her in a sauna, cheeks flushed. Then a shot of sushi arranged like a magazine spread. Then her grinning under a green clay mask, nails freshly painted toes, soaking in rose petals. A carousel of self-indulgence. Mom had commented on nearly every one. "So cute. You deserve it. Love you, sweetie." Dad chimed in with his usual arsenal of thumbs-up emojis. Not a single word about me. Not one question about why I hadn't posted, texted, or answered. Nothing. I scrolled back, searching for some mistake. Maybe I had told them no. I'd been unconscious when they brought me in. A nurse had asked if I wanted to call someone, and I'd shaken my head. A part of me wanted to test them to see if they would notice without being told. Now I had my answer. They hadn't noticed at all. By the third day, the walls of that room felt closer. The TV muttered to itself in the corner. A physical therapist who looked barely old enough to shave stopped by chirping instructions about deep breathing exercises so my ribs wouldn't stiffen. I did as he said, each breath like a crowbar wedging my chest open. I nodded, smiled weakly. played the good patient. But when he left, the silence folded around me again. I stared at the blank ceiling and thought about all the ways I had carried my family, all the nights I'd picked up the phone at 1 a.m., when Carly sobbed about rent, or when Mom cried about debt collectors. All the times Dad hinted at repairs he couldn't cover until I offered. I had been their lifeline, their fixer, their walking safety net. And here I was, bruised and broken, and they didn't even know. The nurse came in with discharge papers on the 4th day. "You're not to drive for at least a week," she warned. "Plenty of rest. Keep the sling on that shoulder. Someone picking you up?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. I hadn't asked. No one had offered. "I'll call a ride," I said finally, my voice flat. She nodded like it was normal. I shuffled into the lobby, hoodie zipped over the scratchy hospital gown because I couldn't lift my arm high enough to change into a real shirt. I waited nearly an hour for the rideshare to show. Families came and went around me, fathers wheeling out mothers, husbands guiding wives carefully, children carrying bags of flowers. I sat alone, ribs aching, clutching a plastic pharmacy bag with painkillers. My ride pulled up. I climbed in without a word. At home, I collapsed into my chair and let sleep swallow me. When I woke the next morning, the world felt muted. My phone finally switched back to loud. That's when it lit up over and over like a slot machine I didn't want to win. 64 missed calls in less than 2 days. The screen scrolled with names. Dad, Dad Carly, Mom Carly again. No voicemails. Just one text pinned at the top, stark and urgent. "Call us back now. It's serious." I stared at it, heart pounding, the irony bitter as bile. Not a word when I was lying in a hospital bed, but now it was serious. My thumb hovered over the call button. For a split second, I wondered if they knew, if somehow the silence had reached them. Maybe they had finally realized something was wrong. But a colder thought seeped in, the one that settled heavy in my chest. They didn't want me. They wanted something from me. And I was about to find out exactly what. The phone barely rang once before Dad picked up. His voice shot through the line, tense, fast, almost frantic. "Emily. Finally. We've been trying to reach you. Something's wrong with the bank. Your mother's card got declined. Carly's rent didn't go through and I can't get the car payment processed. They're freezing accounts. I don't know what's going on, but it's urgent." I blinked, the words not sinking in at first. "Dad," I began, but he plowed forward, his sentences colliding like cars on black ice. "Your mom's phone bill bounced, and she's already late on utilities. Carly called me crying. She tried to pay her rent and it rejected her card twice. She's panicking, Emily. Her gym even tried charging her and it got declined. Now she's saying she can't get into her Uber account because it's linked to that backup card. I've been on the phone with customer service for hours. I need you to call the bank and straighten this out." The room tilted, not from the concussion, but from the absurdity. My ribs ached with each breath as I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "Wait," I said slowly. "You're telling me you've been calling because Mom's card didn't work, because Carly's rent didn't clear." "Not just rent," he said, frustration sharpening his tone like I wasn't grasping the magnitude of the crisis. "Her backup card froze too. She was humiliated at a restaurant when it declined. Do you know how that looks? And your mother had her cart halfway through checkout before the card failed. The system's acting like there's fraud or something. Emily, you've got to fix this. Now." It landed like a stone at the bottom of my stomach. They hadn't noticed I was missing. They hadn't worried about my silence. They had only noticed when their pipeline to me, the endless flow of money, credit, and quiet problem-solving, dried up. For the first time, they needed me more than I needed them. I let the silence stretch until Dad's breathing filled the space. He misread it, thought I was scrambling, already logging into accounts. His tone softened, coaxing. "Look, I don't know what happened. Maybe it's just a glitch. You're good with this stuff, better than any of us. Call the bank, explain, unfreeze things. Carly's landlord already threatened late fees. Your mom's furious. I can't keep them calm on my own." My hand shook, not from pain, but from a slow rising clarity. "Dad," I said finally. My voice steady. Too steady. I was in a car accident. The silence that followed was not the silence I had hoped for. Not stunned worry, not grief. It was confusion, the pause of someone recalculating, searching for a way to fold the new information into their existing problem. What he said. When 4 nights ago I answered, I flipped my car at an intersection. 2 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder concussion. I spent 3 days in the hospital. I just got discharged yesterday. Another pause. Then, as if on reflex, why didn't you call us? The question sliced deep. I swallowed, because I wanted to see if anyone would notice I was gone. You didn't. The only messages I saw were spa photos and sushi plates. Dad exhaled hard, the sound more annoyance than anguish. Emily, we didn't know. If you'd told us... That's the point, I cut in, heat creeping into my voice. You didn't even notice. Not once did anyone ask why I wasn't responding. Not Mom, not Carly, not you. But the second the cards stop working, suddenly it's an emergency. His defensiveness arrived like clockwork. Your sister has been under a lot of stress. The spa weekend was supposed to help her anxiety. Your mother has her own things going on too. We can't be expected to monitor every silence. And honestly, you should have called us from the hospital. You can't hold that against us. I gripped the phone until my palm hurt. I'm not holding it against you, I said quietly. I'm learning from it. He didn't understand. Or maybe he did, and just didn't want to. Look, Emily, we'll talk about this later. Right now, I need you to fix the accounts. Carly's... I hung up before he could finish. The click was louder than his entire ramble. My heart hammered not from guilt, but from a clean, sharp line being drawn for the first time in years. They hadn't called because I almost died. They had called because their lifeline had snapped. And in that moment, I knew I was done being the family's safety net. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table in the same hoodie and hospital gown I'd been wearing since discharge. The apartment was dim blinds, drawn the only light the pale glow of my laptop. My ribs throbbed with every breath, my shoulder was immobilized in a sling, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. There was no storm of anger, no wild impulse for vengeance, just a calm, almost clinical clarity. I opened my accounts one by one, logged into every portal I knew by heart, checked balances, auto-pays, linked cards. For years, I'd told myself I was helping. Carly needed a backup card for emergencies. Mom's utilities were better streamlined under my account since I never missed payments. Dad's car loan had gone delinquent once, so I set up the autopay myself. Little lifelines, little conveniences, all designed to keep the peace. But the truth looked different in black and white, in digital columns that told me I'd been less a daughter than a credit union in human form. So I started cutting cords. Freeze, cancel, remove, change password, lock. The words stacked like bricks, each one a wall between me and the people who had mistaken my reliability for obligation. Carly's gym membership gone. Mom's cell plan removed. Dad's backup card cut. Auto-pays for utilities canceled. Netflix, Hulu, Spotify services I never used but always paid for terminated. I wasn't angry. I was methodical. Each click of the mouse felt less like retaliation and more like CPR performed on myself. I'd been suffocating in silence for years, and for the first time I was filling my lungs. The first reactions came fast. Carly was always the quickest to notice. By noon, my phone lit up with her messages. Carly, my card isn't working, WTF. Carly, I can't pay rent. The landlord's threatening fees. Please fix it. Carly, Emily, answer me. When I didn't respond, the calls started. 4, then 6, then 12, all back to back. The voicemails began frantic, then angry, then tearful. This isn't funny, Em. You can't just shut me out like this. What am I supposed to do? By evening, Mom joined the chorus. Her tone was sugar-sweet at first. Honey, I think something weird's going on with the bank. Could you look into it? By the second message, Emily, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't fair to your mother. My phone bill bounced in front of the clerk. Do you know how humiliating that is? And Dad, ever the negotiator, left a measured voicemail. I know you're upset. I know you feel like we weren't there, but freezing everything is an overreaction. Carly is careless sometimes, your mom gets distracted, but they love you. Call me back. Let's be reasonable. Not one word about the accident. Not one acknowledgement that I'd nearly died. It was all about what I'd taken, what I'd broken, what I was withholding. I sat at the table listening to their voices echo from the phone speaker. My ribs hurt from the shallow breaths, but the ache inside me went deeper. I'd thought maybe, just maybe, someone would realize the weight of what I was saying without words, but no. To them, this wasn't a cry for recognition. It was betrayal. The grief surprised me more than the silence had. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel powerful. I felt hollow, as if the cords I'd cut weren't just theirs, but mine too. I'd built my identity around being the dependable one, the fixer. Without that role, who was I? Still, I didn't answer. I couldn't. I knew if I picked up, I'd fold like I always had. I'd soothe, I'd explain, I'd hand them back the keys to my life. And I wasn't ready to erase the one boundary I'd finally drawn. The phone buzzed again, another incoming call from Carly. I let it ring until it died. Moments later, the buzzer downstairs blared. My chest tightened. I stood slowly peering through the blinds. Down on the sidewalk, parked half on the curb, was Carly's little red sedan. She was at the intercom, pressing the button again and again, her other hand gripping her phone. The buzzer blared through my apartment, sharp and insistent. My ribs flared with every sound. Emily. I know you're home. Her voice crackled through the speaker. Please, just talk to me. Just tell me what's going on. We can fix it. I froze where I was, heart pounding. My body screamed to move, to respond, to open the door like I always had. But my hand stayed at my side. The buzzer blared once more, then silence. I watched from the blinds as Carly stood there for a long moment, scanning the windows as if I might wave down. Finally, she turned, stomped back to her car, and slammed the door. The engine revved and she peeled away taillights, vanishing into the street. I stayed still long after she was gone, the silence pressing against me from all sides. For the first time, the roles were reversed. She was the one outside, locked out, waiting for an answer. And I was the one choosing silence. But the grief in my chest told me this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The silence didn't last long. When Carly realized she couldn't badger me into opening the door, she pivoted just like she always did, rewriting the story so she came out the victim. It started with whispers I heard secondhand through mutual acquaintances. According to Carly, I'd snapped. She said I'd cut off the family out of nowhere for no reason anyone could understand. Mom, never one to resist drama, confirmed the story in her own way. Teary phone calls to cousins, vague Facebook statuses about broken hearts, and some people not being well. By the end of the week, my phone lit up with screenshots friends thought I should see. Mom had posted a picture of herself holding a coffee cup captioned, "Trying to stay strong during this difficult time. Please keep our family in your prayers." The comments section was a parade of sympathy. "You're such a good mom. Stay strong. Praying for your daughter." None of them knew the daughter they were praying for was me, painted as the unstable one. At first I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that made my ribs ache. But the more I scrolled, the heavier it felt. They weren't just ignoring my pain, they were actively rewriting it, repackaging me as the villain in their soap opera. That's when the knock came. It was late evening, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I moved quietly to the door, peering through the peephole. Standing there, shifting awkwardly with his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, was Josh, Carly's ex-husband. I hesitated, then opened the door a crack. "Josh." He looked up sheepish. "Hey, can I come in? Just for a minute?" I let him in, wary but curious. He stood in the middle of my living room, glancing around like he was afraid Carly might materialize from behind the couch. "Listen," he said. I know it's not my business, but Carly's been telling people things. Things about you. I've seen, I said flatly. He nodded. Yeah. She's saying you had some kind of breakdown, that you shut everyone out because you couldn't handle stress, that you're unstable. I didn't believe her, but when she told me you were the reason her rent's not paid, that you sabotaged her. He broke off, shaking his head. I figured I should hear your side. So I told him. Not everything, but enough. The accident, the hospital stay, the spa photos, the silence, the frozen accounts. I watched his face as I spoke, no judgment, no disbelief, just quiet, steady listening. When I finished, he let out a long breath. Figures, he said. That sounds more like her than what she's been saying. It was the first time in weeks someone had looked me in the eye and believed me. The relief came sudden and hot, and I had to blink hard to keep my composure. Josh didn't stay long. Before he left, he said softly, "Don't let them twist this. You did the right thing." Then he slipped out, leaving me with a silence that felt less like loneliness and more like a fragile kind of validation. But outside my walls, the smear campaign gathered steam. Mom doubled down with more posts, photos of her and Carly together, captions like, "Sometimes the strongest families are tested the hardest, and no matter what, we will not give up on her." The comments piled high with pity and applause, strangers comforting them for the pain of losing me. Carly added fuel with Instagram stories about toxic people and betrayal from those closest to you, vague enough to spark curiosity, but pointed enough to shape the narrative. I knew better than to fight it directly. I wasn't going to get into online wars or plead my case in public. Instead, I opened a folder on my desktop and started gathering. Screenshots of the group chat during my hospital stay. The spa photos Carly had flaunted while I was hooked up to IVs. Bank statements showing their bills drafted from my accounts. Payment histories where my name and card details propped up their lives. I even saved copies of Mom's Facebook posts, each one dripping with manufactured sorrow. Not because I planned to use them right away, but because I wanted evidence. Proof that I hadn't lost my mind. That I wasn't the unstable one. That if this ever escalated into something bigger, I wouldn't just have my word, I'd have receipts. For a while, that folder became my shield. Every time another post surfaced, another rumor reached me, I added another piece to the collection. It didn't make the betrayal sting less, but it gave me something solid to hold on to in the middle of their gaslighting storm. Then one evening, I came home to find an envelope slid under my apartment door. Cream-colored thick with my name written across the front in my mother's familiar cursive. I sat down on the couch, ribs aching, and opened it carefully. Inside was a 3-page handwritten letter, every loop of her script neat and deliberate. She began with pleasantries, how things had gotten tense, how she hoped we could find a way back to being a family again. She wrote about how proud she was of me, how responsible I'd always been, how I was the glue holding everyone together. And then the tone shifted. She explained that Carly was in a difficult situation, that she'd fallen behind on bills, that her mental health was fragile. She said Carly needed just a temporary loan to get through the month, and that it would mean the world if I could help just this once. Attached behind the letter was a packet of documentation, a printed credit card statement. Carly's name bold at the top, showing thousands in designer purchases, and a spa membership fee she'd forgotten to cancel. A screenshot of her bank account negative balance highlighted in red. And at the bottom, a typed contract. A loan agreement. Interest terms. Repayment schedule. Signature lines for Carly, for me, and for a witness. My mother had drawn up legal paperwork to turn me into Carly's creditor. I stared at it for a long time, my pulse loud in my ears. They hadn't just forgotten me in a hospital bed. They hadn't just rewritten the story online. They were still trying to use me, only now dressed up in cursive and legalese. The letter slipped from my hands and landed on the coffee table. The room swayed around me. It was no longer a question of being forgotten. It was proof in ink and signatures that to them I wasn't a daughter. I was a bank. And for the first time I wondered how far they were willing to go to keep me that way. The letter should have been the peak of the madness, but it wasn't. It was only the prelude. A few days later, I opened my email and froze. The subject line read, "Unusual activity alert." It was from a bank I hadn't thought about in months, one of those old accounts I'd stopped using years ago. I clicked it open, heart thudding. There it was in black and white, a failed transfer attempt of $900. The recipient, Carly's old Venmo account. I stared so long at the screen my eyes blurred. It was one thing for them to be careless, to ignore me in a hospital bed, to cry victim when I finally stopped being their lifeline. But this was deliberate. This was theft. She hadn't come to me begging this time. She hadn't even tried to manipulate me with tears. She'd gone hunting through the past, remembered an account I'd left half forgotten, and tried to siphon money quietly like a thief creeping through a house she used to own. That was the last straw. I called the bank. My voice shook, but not from fear, from something colder, steadier. I told them the account was dormant, that the attempt wasn't authorized. They flagged it immediately, set up monitoring, filed a fraud alert. I asked them to keep everything frozen and to log the details, the device, the IP address, her name. If she tried again, it would trip like a wire across a minefield. When I hung up, the silence in my apartment felt sharp like glass edges. I sank into the couch ribs, aching with every breath, and let it wash over me. Years of memories paraded through my mind, not tender ones, not the good moments families are supposed to cling to, but transactions. Carly sobbing at midnight and me wiring money before sunrise. Mom hinting about overdue bills and me transferring funds before she even asked. Dad complaining about car trouble and me sliding my card across the counter at the repair shop. It was endless. Every sacrifice I had made quietly, without fanfare, without thanks, because that's what I thought family meant. I thought being dependable would earn love, or at least recognition. But they hadn't seen me at all. Not as a person, not as a daughter, not as Emily. To them, I was a safety net, a credit line, a walking bailout. Even in my most vulnerable moment in a hospital bed with broken ribs and a concussion, they hadn't noticed I was gone. They only noticed when the stream of resources dried up. And when I cut the stream, Carly hadn't paused, hadn't asked why, hadn't apologized. She'd tried to steal. I felt something inside me crack, not like a bone, but like a chain. A tether I hadn't realized I'd been dragging behind me. For years I'd told myself it was love. That being the fixer was just who I was. That they leaned on me because I was strong. But strength isn't real if it only exists to hold other people up. And love isn't love when it flows one way. The realization was both devastating and liberating. I wasn't losing a family. I was shedding an illusion. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Carly's name, my mother's, my dad's. For a flicker of a second, I thought about calling, confronting, demanding answers. But what would that do? I already knew their answers. Excuses, defensiveness, guilt trips. Maybe even more lies. No. I was done feeding the machine. Instead, I opened my settings. One by one, I blocked them. Carly first calls, texts, FaceTime all shut down. Then Mom. Then Dad. My finger moved steadily without hesitation. It was mechanical, almost peaceful. I moved to social media, clicking through profiles, blocking every avenue they might use to reach me. Email filters were next, anything from their addresses routed straight to trash. Every door they might pound on, I closed. The quiet afterward was startling. My phone, once buzzing non-stop with their demands, sat still on the table, its screen dark. My chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, but each one felt easier than the last. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt something better, free. Still, I knew this wasn't the end. Families like mine didn't let go of their resources easily. They'd come looking again. They'd knock louder, push harder, find new ways to paint me as the villain. But they would never get back inside. Not now. Not ever. I stood at the window looking down at the empty street. The city was alive, neon lights, blinking cars rushing past, strangers going about their lives. For the first time, I realized I was one of them. Just another person no longer tethered, no longer the invisible pillar of someone else's house. The phone sat silent behind me, severed from their grasp. And I knew without doubt that I had just cut the last thread. The silence didn't hold for long. It never does. When people are used to your lifelines, they thrash the hardest once they're cut loose. Carly was the first to fall. The texts slowed, then stopped altogether. A week later, I got an automated email meant for her emergency contact, the address she'd never updated. It was from her landlord. Past due rent, late fees, final notice before eviction. My name shouldn't have been anywhere on it, but of course it was. She had used me as backup even there. 2 days after that, I scrolled out of habit and realized her Instagram was gone. At first I thought she'd blocked me, but no, her entire page had been wiped. No champagne photos, no spa selfies, no carefully curated stories. Just a blank void where her digital life had been. The girl who posted every latte art swirl, every manicure, every moment of her existence, had vanished. Later I heard through the grapevine she lost her car too. Repossessed after she missed 3 payments I used to cover on autopay. For the first time in years, Carly was living on her own terms. And from the outside, it looked like those terms were brutal. Mom unraveled in her own way. Without my quiet payments, the utilities didn't just act weird, they shut off. Friends told me they saw her at the grocery store with a stack of coupons, a cart only half full. But online, she doubled down. Post after post, dripping with vague sorrow. Hard times make strong families. Please keep us in your prayers. Even when someone turns their back, love never stops. The comments rolled in like waves. You're so strong. She'll come around. Family is forever. The sympathy she craved arrived in bulk, but it was built on a lie that I was the wayward one, the selfish one. Her reputation began to strain anyway. It's hard to keep up a polished facade when the lights don't stay on. Neighbors started whispering, asking questions. Some reached out to me quietly, wondering what the truth was. I didn't answer. And Dad was quiet. Eerily so. No late-night calls, no texts demanding explanations, no guilt-laced speeches about duty and family. Weeks passed in silence, until one morning a single text arrived. I didn't know. I see it now. I'm sorry. 6 words. That was it. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to believe him, to latch onto the possibility that one person, just one, had finally understood. But I couldn't ignore the weight of history of silence, of all the moments he'd chosen convenience over truth. Those 6 words weren't enough to rebuild anything. So I didn't respond. The bridge was burned. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. What settled over me instead was grief. Not the sharp, searing grief of sudden loss, but the slow ache of realizing something you believed in had never really existed. I had mourned my family quietly for years without realizing it, every time they leaned on me without asking how I was, every time my love was measured only in dollars or favors. Now, without the illusion, I was left with the bones of it, a family that had never truly seen me. At night, the silence in my apartment felt different. Not the fragile, frightened quiet of waiting for their next demand, but a heavy stillness, like a house after a funeral. I would sit on the couch, sling still holding my shoulder in place, and feel the absence of them like a weight pressing against my ribs. The grief surprised me. It made me cry when I least expected it. Folding laundry, washing a cup, passing by a family in the park. But beneath the grief, something else stirred. Freedom. One evening, I opened a new browser tab and typed apartments for rent. I wasn't just cutting them off. I was shedding the version of myself that had built a life around their needs. This apartment had been chosen for convenience, close to Carly's old place, within driving distance of Mom and Dad. Every choice I'd made had been measured by proximity to their crises. Now I wanted distance. A clean slate. I started scrolling through listings, smaller spaces, new neighborhoods, places where I could be anonymous. Each photo felt like a door opening into a life that was finally mine. I bookmarked one, then another, then another. When I closed the laptop, my chest hurt less than it had in months. The grief was still there, but now it was paired with something brighter: anticipation. The bridge had burned. But ahead of me, I saw a road I hadn't walked before, and I knew it was time to start packing. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not just the absence of ringing phones or buzzing notifications, but a deeper, heavier silence, like someone had cut the power on the constant hum of chaos that had been my life for years. No frantic late-night calls from Carly. No endless texts from Mom about bills due tomorrow. No polite but insistent voicemails from Dad layered with obligation. My phone sat dark on the counter for entire days, and for the first time that emptiness felt like oxygen. At night, I lay in bed and realized my body wasn't bracing anymore. I wasn't half asleep waiting for the buzz of a crisis that only I could fix. The stillness pressed against me, unfamiliar, almost eerie but undeniably peaceful. It was like walking into a forest after years of living next to a freeway, the silence so total, you almost hear your own blood rushing in your ears. Of course, peace didn't come clean. It was tinged with grief, the kind that sneaks in through cracks you thought you sealed. I'd find myself reaching for the phone sometimes, half expecting a message from Mom saying she made soup, or Carly asking if I wanted to grab coffee. I'd catch myself drafting a text just to see if Dad wanted to talk about the baseball game. Then I'd remember. They hadn't checked in when I was broken and bleeding in a hospital bed. They hadn't cared enough to ask why I went silent. The only silence they noticed was the silence of frozen accounts. That truth sat like a stone in my chest. The strange thing was how the grief softened over time. In the beginning, it was raw, stabbing me when I least expected it. But as the days stretched into weeks, it dulled like a scar forming over an old wound. What took its place was a kind of clarity. I started thinking about the stories we're told growing up, about how family is everything, how blood is thicker than water, how you never turn your back on the people who share your name. I used to believe those words so fiercely that I let them chain me in place. But sitting in that quiet apartment, I realized how dangerous those phrases can be. Because when family is everything, it can excuse everything. Neglect, exploitation, emotional blackmail, abuse. You're supposed to forgive it all because blood demands it. But blood isn't a guarantee of love. It isn't proof of loyalty. It isn't even a promise of decency. All it does is give people a built-in excuse to claim ownership over you, to confuse your kindness for currency. And if you question it, you're branded ungrateful, selfish, broken. I had been called all of those things, if not to my face, then in whispers, in posts, in the way my family reshaped the narrative. But for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about it. Boundaries weren't selfish. Boundaries were survival. I began to build new rituals into the quiet. I woke up and made coffee without checking my phone for crises. I cooked dinner for myself, real meals, not drive-through tacos, gulped in exhaustion. I went for walks, earbuds in, losing myself in music I hadn't listened to in years, because the soundtrack of my life had always been other people's emergencies. My body healed slowly, ribs knitting back together, shoulder regaining strength, but my spirit healed faster in the silence. Sometimes I would open the folder on my desktop, the one labeled simply Evidence. Inside were the screenshots of Carly's spa photos, the group chat full of champagne emojis while I was in the ER, the bank statements showing every bill they'd let funnel through me, Mom's posts dripping with performative grief, the loan contract she'd handwritten as though I were nothing more than a creditor. And finally, the fraud alert from the bank, Carly's last desperate attempt to siphon from me in secret. I didn't open the folder to stew in anger. I didn't plot revenge. I kept it because memory is slippery, and I knew there would come a day when I might doubt myself, when I might look back through rose-colored glasses and wonder if I'd been too harsh, too final. The folder was my anchor, my reminder of why I chose freedom. Looking at those files, I didn't feel rage. I felt resolve. It wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about not forgetting. Because forgetting would mean I might let the cycle restart. And I couldn't. I wouldn't. The silence in my apartment stretched long and steady, carrying me forward like a river I'd finally stepped into on my own terms. The grief was still there, but it was quieter now, drowned out by the sound of my own life beginning to take shape. And every night before I closed my laptop, I would hover over that folder. I never deleted it. I never renamed it. I just let it sit there, waiting a quiet witness to the life I had finally claimed. Not for revenge, for remembrance. Because freedom, I was learning, isn't just something you win once. It's something you choose over and over again. And I knew I would keep choosing it. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Boxes leaned against walls, still bare of photos, the floor scuffed only by movers' boots and my own tentative steps. It was smaller than my last place, tucked into a building where no one knew me, in a neighborhood where the grocery clerk didn't call me hon like Mom used to. For the first time in my adult life, I'd chosen a home not for proximity to family, but for proximity to myself. I'd made it official. New apartment, new bank, new number. No forwarding address, no digital breadcrumbs to follow. The locks clicked shut with a satisfying finality that I felt in my ribs. Even the bank felt like a fresh start. I sat across from a young teller who didn't know my name, didn't know my history, and asked for everything new. Account, debit, credit, all shielded under a password no one else would guess. The old accounts were either closed or stripped clean, my name disentangled from every auto-pay, every joint plan. The system that once tied me to them had been dismantled piece by piece until nothing remained. It wasn't just them I cut loose. Neutral relatives, the cousins who had messaged me half-hearted hope you're okay, while still liking Mom's pity posts, stopped hearing from me too. They hadn't done anything terrible, but they'd watched the lies spread and stayed silent. And silence, I'd learned, is complicity. This time my boundaries stretched wide. If it cost me the whole extended family, then so be it. The grief stayed with me. I won't lie and say cutting them off was clean or easy. At night, unpacking dishes into empty cupboards, I would feel it press down on me. The ache of knowing I'd never again walk into my parents' house for the holidays. The realization that Carly and I would never sit side by side at some future birthday party, not even with the stiff civility other sisters manage. The recognition that when my parents age someone else, maybe no one will be there, and it will not be me. Grief, but also relief. Like carrying a boulder up a hill for so long that when you finally set it down, your arms ache from the absence of weight. The void left behind wasn't hollow, it was healing. I filled that void with myself. I bought curtains, I liked not ones chosen for resale value. I filled the fridge with food that made me happy instead of meals quick enough to eat between Carly's emergencies. I signed up for a pottery class, something I'd wanted since college but never had time for. On weeknights, I curled up with books I'd meant to read for years. The quiet was no longer eerie. It was sanctuary. Sometimes I thought about the cultural script I'd grown up with: blood is everything. Family comes first. You never turn your back on your own. I saw now how those words had been used as chains binding me to people who gave me nothing in return. Loyalty without reciprocity isn't noble, it's dangerous. It asks you to light yourself on fire to keep others warm, even as they stand by with matches. I'd believed for too long that selflessness was love, that if I kept fixing, kept paying, kept carrying, one day they'd turn around and see me. But love without recognition isn't love, it's labor. And I was done performing labor in exchange for scraps of conditional affection. Family isn't who shares your name, I whispered one night, staring out the window at the city lights blinking against the dark. It's who shows up when your world breaks, not when theirs does. The truth was bitter, but it freed me. On moving day, when the last box was set down in my new apartment, I opened my laptop. The folder was still there. Evidence. Screenshots, bills, letters, bank alerts. Proof of everything. I hovered over it for a long time, wondering if I should finally delete it. But I didn't. I closed the laptop and left it untouched. Not for revenge, for remembrance. For the reminder of why I'd chosen freedom, why I'd built this new life. Because forgetting would make it too easy to slip back. That night I sat on the bare floor sipping from a chipped mug surrounded by boxes I hadn't yet unpacked. The silence filled the room, not the silence of neglect, but the silence of ownership. My life, my choices, my space. They had spent years thinking I'd always come back, that no matter how many times they drained me, I would rebuild patching bridges faster than they could burn them. But they were wrong. They finally learned what happens when the bridge builder walks away and takes every plank with her. And for the first time in my life, I'm not rebuilding. I'm living. And with that, Emily's story closes on a quieter, stronger chapter of her life, one built not on obligation, but on freedom. If this story moved you, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every comment and your voice matters here. Don't forget to subscribe if you'd like more stories like this one. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Revenge Served Cold. We'll see you next time.